Good evening and welcome to Prime Time Lawmakers, GPB's nightly coverage of the Georgia General Assembly. It's the third legislative day of the 2012 session. I'm Scott Slade. Coming up in tonight's program, remarks Governor Nathan Neal made about education funding have been making quite a stir. We'll bring you extended reaction to the governor's State of the State speech. The governor's budget is released today. The $19.2 billion spending bill also eliminates 154 state jobs. Continuing coverage of the State of the State speech, I'll be joined by Tom Crawford, editor of the Georgia Report, for in-depth analysis of what Governor Neal had to say. And a major theme of the governor's address last night was judicial reform and the creation of so-called drug courts. Representative Jay Neal will be joining me on set to talk about what the governor says are long-term money-saving initiatives and how those alternative courts really work. But first, our Keosha Howard is standing by with some reaction to Governor Neal's remarks from last night. Good evening, Keosha.
Good evening, Scott. Now, Governor Neal put heavy emphasis on the importance of education in his address last night. He says that for the first time in several years, the Quality Basic Education Funding Formula, or QBE, which determines how money is spent on each student, will be fully funded if lawmakers go along with his recommendations.
My proposed budget calls for an additional $55.8 million to fund salary increases for our teachers based on training and experience. Unlike the past, there are no reductions in QBE, equalization grants, state schools, or other enrollment-driven programs. Within education, I've called for a new focus on our youngest learners. The budget I'm proposing increases the pre-K school year for 84,000 students by 10 days, bringing it to 170 days.
We applaud Governor Neal for his commitment to education, realizing that education is on the front line. That's one of the themes that we use. Education and educators are on the front line. His commitment to restoring the cuts to pre-K funding and no cuts to the QBE funding. Teachers can do their jobs without having to spend money from their personal pockets, but we know that there's a budget crunch all over the state, so we do think Governor Neal is working to restore that and bring Georgia back where it needs to be.
The initiatives outlined in Governor Neal's address seem to be garnering support from both sides of the aisle. Representative Stacey Abrams says that the Democrats are supportive, but that the governor failed to address one important issue.
We're very excited about the direction the governor has set for the state of Georgia, his emphasis on education, on criminal justice reform, on creating jobs. The question now is, how are we going to pay for it? He listed an extraordinary, I think, direction in terms of investment, but we have to be certain that we aren't taking from one group to pay for these initiatives. I think the governor focused very strongly on some important issues, but what we didn't hear was rural recovery. Our South Georgia farmers are suffering because of HB 87. We have put in place a number of regulations through E-Verify that are going to hit not only our farmers but also hit our small business members hard. And for a party that believes in decreasing regulation, E-Verify, while constitutional, is not necessary, and it's bad for business. And so what we will be focusing on as Democrats is making certain that while we focus on these important issues, while we talk about education and economic security and shared responsibility, we cannot take our eye off the ball. South of Macon, we have farmers, we have small business members, we have folks who need our help, and we have an obligation to serve the entire state of Georgia. And so we plan to be the voice of rural recovery in the state of Georgia.
Senate Appropriations Chair Jack Hill admits that the budget will be a challenge and legislators will have to be very careful when allocating resources.
We're still at the level we were before the recession as far as revenues, so state government is still pretty lean, and obviously in all sorts of areas there, for money for developmental disabilities and mental health, all these areas that need more resources, but we're just going to be very measured about the way we approach that and basically continue to live within our means. Georgia has maintained its AAA bond rating by not raising taxes, by cutting its budget where it needed to, and just basically living on the revenues that we had. And I think that's what the people of the state expect us to do.
Scott, overall reactions to Governor Deal's State of the State address were positive. His proposed budget came out today, and lawmakers will start to make changes next week, and we will get to a little bit more of that later in the show. Reporting live from the Capitol, I'm Keosha Howard for Lawmakers.
Thanks very much, Keosha. 42-minute speech last night, some couple of dozen interruptions for applause. Let's refer to a recent state poll on Georgians' attitudes about what their lawmakers should be doing in this session. In addition to education, the economy, and taxes, the issue that Georgians ranked in the top 4 concerns is health care as well. The legislature is likely to address that issue in several ways this session. Our own Sandra Parrish asked House Speaker David Ralston about the status of federal health care reform and Georgia's role in preparing for a state-run health insurance exchange. Here's more from our exclusive leadership interview with the Speaker.
Well, I'm a great believer in state control as opposed to federal mandates. I think it's always important that we go that route as opposed to having Washington dictate how we do business here in Georgia. By the same token, I think that we really need a final resolution through the courts. We expect that we'll have that by the end of June on the constitutionality of the Obamacare plan. I have my own hope as to how that will be resolved, so I don't know that it's necessary that we rush into planning for something that may not happen. I think we can. I don't think we're under any deadlines there, and I think we can be very deliberate in how we proceed on that issue.
So basically just hold off and wait at least another year.
I think that's an option.
Of course, the budget's the most important thing the General Assembly does every year. We now go back live to the Capitol, where Prime Time Lawmaker Sandra Parrish is taking a look at the governor's budget proposal for both the amended 2012 and the 2013 budgets, just out today. Good evening, Sandra.
Good evening, Scott. The governor's 2012 amended budget proposal stands at $18.5 billion. That's an increase of 4.5% over what was passed last year. The 2013 budget is just under 4% higher at $19.2 billion. I've learned that includes the elimination of nearly 900 positions. Over 150 of them are currently filled. The budget also includes $24 million to buy the Reserve Command building at Fort McPherson, which has been decommissioned by the Army. It could be potentially used to relocate several state departments, including public safety. Another $15 million is being earmarked to purchase land adjacent to the World Congress Center complex, which could be used for further expansion. The governor also expecting to save nearly $9 million by implementing zero-based budgeting, requiring agencies to justify the total spending in 37 state programs.
Beginning this year, we will implement zero-based budgeting in 10% of all programs. Through zero-based budgeting, we will bring a new level of accountability to state government and verify that taxpayer dollars are being spent to meet the priorities of Georgians.
They're hearing themselves.
We spoke with Alan Essig with the think tank Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, who calls the spending plan conservative.
With the moderate revenue growth that's expected, without additional revenues, the governor didn't have much of a choice. I think he tried to make some improvements where he could. He tried to minimize the cuts that he could do. It's more of a status quo budget. We're at a new low, and the budget stabilized more or less, and we're kind of moving forward from there. What he doesn't seem to be able to do is to put back the budget is down about $3 billion from where it was before the recession. And there's $3 billion of real cuts, and don't seem to be in a position to put back any of that money, especially in education, both K through 12 and the border regions.
Now, at yesterday's Eggs and Issues breakfast, the governor touched on many of his priorities for this session, including tax reform. He says it's the biggest way to attract new business to the state and make it more competitive.
January the 10th. What a difference a year makes.
Georgia's snow and ice storm forced last year's Eggs and Issues breakfast to be postponed, but the World Congress Center drew a packed house this year as Governor Nathan Deal used the address to lay out his proposed tax reform plan.
We are proposing the elimination of the sales tax on energy used in manufacturing, a move that will align us with many of our top competitors. In an age of much higher energy cost, this will impact a large component of manufacturers' overall cost structure and will vastly improve the competitive position of the producers in our state.
We've been working on this for 5 or 6 years. Over that course of 5 or 6 years, we've seen hundreds of millions of dollars of investment by companies with a major presence in Georgia go to Alabama, the Carolinas, Virginia. Those are investment dollars that need to remain in Georgia and secure the jobs of Georgians and create new jobs for Georgians.
But House Minority Leader Stacey Abrams wonders how that lost revenue will be replaced.
I think, like most of the legislature, we agree that exempting that sales tax on energy and manufacturing is the right thing to do. The question isn't should we do it, it's how do we pay for it. So we're looking forward to seeing the governor's proposal, understanding the numbers, and making certain that in order to help manufacturing, we don't put a heavier burden on families. But if we can do both, if we can serve those businesses and increase jobs, then we are looking forward to helping it.
Another part of the governor's plan includes sales and use tax exemptions for construction materials used in projects of regional significance.
This is an important business climate issue, and we need the ability to authorize this exemption when competing for projects that are creating a large number of jobs here in Georgia. You know, when it comes down to Georgia versus Virginia or Florida, the competition is tight. It often goes down to the wire, even into overtime. And quite frankly, folks, this is one field goal that Georgia cannot afford to miss.
I think the intent is right, which is that we need to give more tools to local governments so that they can be responsive to the needs of their citizens and the business needs. But again, we have to make certain that when we're doing that, we look at things comprehensively. And as much as we want to exempt taxes to bring in business, if the tax burden then shifts to the citizens who live in those communities, we've got to make certain that we're not creating a burden that doesn't wash in the end.
The final aspect of the governor's plan modernizes Georgia's tax credits, including those for higher paying jobs.
This has proven to be a valuable tool in recruiting companies. But up to now, companies were required to create 50 or more jobs to qualify for the credits. We are proposing to decrease the quality job creation threshold from 50 jobs to 15. This will reshape the landscape in Georgia for small business owners.
Following the governor's address, House Speaker David Ralston and Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle were asked questions on various topics. The speaker says while he favors the governor's tax reform proposal, he would like to go further.
I do believe that comprehensive tax reform is the route to go. I don't make any secret that I generally favor a consumption tax as opposed to an income tax. I think that's better for our for making us economically competitive here in Georgia. I think that, and I do support the repeal of the sales tax on energy used in manufacturing and other sectors of our economy. I think that's important. I think that reforming the telecom piece is important. There are other important pieces, but it all kind of has to fit together at the end of the day.
Both Ralston and Cagle say they support a constitutional amendment to allow state-approved charter schools to receive local funds. 10 schools lost half their funding last year after the state Supreme Court ruled it was unconstitutional to require local systems to provide the money.
We can't build a 21st educational system on a 1960s model. We have to have change. We have to embrace change. And charters is one of those agents for change. And I think we owe it to the citizens of our state to make sure that this method is available and accessible. The more options we have, the better we're going to be to foster an entrepreneurial spirit within education that is built on innovation.
And Governor Deal is providing those schools with nearly $9 million in his amended budget. Scott will, of course, be following what happens throughout the budget process as hearings begin next week. Reporting live, I'm Sandra Parrish for Prime Time Lawmakers.
Thank you very much, Sandra. In fact, little breaking news at the Capitol this evening. We're getting some reports that the federal government has given Governor Deal the power to lower the toll on the express lanes, on those controversial HOT express lanes in I-85 through Gwinnett and DeKalb counties. 16-mile stretch. He can lower the toll to 1 cent a mile at his will during non-rush hours. The federal government has something to say about this because they help pay for the project. We're still waiting on the governor's request for two-person carpools to ride free again. Also today, Governor Deal announced 11 grant winners of the Race to the Top program. $19.4 million will go to schools, institutions of higher education, businesses, and nonprofits who partner on education enhancement initiatives. The state was awarded $400 million from the federal government in 2010 to then parcel out to deserving educational partnerships in Georgia. Among those receiving the multi-million-dollar awards are the Murray County STEM Academy, the new Teacher Residency Project in Atlanta, the Smyrna Academy of Excellence, and the STEM Teaching and Leadership Academy in Athens. 7 other programs will share in the $19.4 million award. Well, we'll take a short break here on Prime Time Lawmakers, but please stay tuned. There's a lot more to come here in the next few minutes here for you. Tom Crawford is going to have more reaction and analysis of the State of the State address and a tribute to a true Georgia legend. Stay with us. The House today paid tribute to the voice of the dogs, Larry Munson, who passed away last November at age 89. Munson delivered play-by-play over the Bulldog Radio Network for 42 years. Lawrence Smith was a sideline reporter for the University of Georgia and worked with Munson for many years. He told the State House what a pleasure it was to work with Larry.
For over 35 years, I had the unique pleasure of seeing the Bulldogs up close and hearing Larry in my headset. He was a colorful, unforgettable character for sure. He grew up in Minnesota, but he became the quintessential Bulldog. And I think you'll agree when I say that we'll miss him, but aren't we glad he came our way? Thank you.
Munson family members were also president of the chamber. Larry meant a great deal to a lot of Georgians, and he made a great deal to me as well. I had a chance to work with Larry Munson for over 20 years on WSB Radio. Governor Deal had a big night last night during his 45-minute State of the State speech. He touched on topics from education to judicial reform. We're going to take a look at some more of those highlights from the State of the State speech. And joining me now for the Capitol is Tom Crawford of the Georgia Report. Tom is a regular contributor to Prime Time Lawmakers and brings over 30 years' experience covering state government. Tom, it might be hard to pick out a single thread from last night's speech, but it certainly seems the jobs and the economy seem to be weighing heavily in the governor's mind.
I think you could say that was job one for him in the coming year, Scott, and he made that very clear.
Let's take a look at a little bit of what the governor had to say last night.
A public-private initiative that will round out our workforce development program by educating young people and the public at large about the skilled trades. Right here in Metro Atlanta, Siemens has been unable to fill approximately 200 skilled trade positions in the fields of manufacturing automation, healthcare technology, transportation systems, and technical service. It is time we begin work to boost our pipeline.
Well, Tom, it sounds like that the governor wants to make skilled workers ready for these skilled jobs that are going unfilled in Georgia, beginning from pre-K all the way up to high school graduation.
Yes, and he said, Scott, he wants to get higher education out of the ivory tower and make it more relevant to the people who actually are getting jobs, especially in things like industrial trades.
Now, go ahead.
No, go. I'm fine.
Okay. The governor also said last year's Hope Scholars will continue to receive their current tuition reimbursement. More days are being added to pre-K, and if anything, education wound up being the way it sounds like the governor is going to get more Georgians back to work.
I think that's right, and he is putting a little more emphasis, and because of the improving economic picture, I think it's possible for him to do that. He does feel a well-trained workforce is very, very important for that.
And back to the Hope Scholarship issue, a lot of Georgia families are breathing a sigh of relief after these comments from Governor Deal last night.
And for every student who earns Hope, my budget for next year maintains the same award amount as was received this year. Also, we will again appropriate $20 million for the needs-based program, 1% loan program for needy students. Because this is a burden that sometimes faces students and they have nowhere to turn. This year, more than half of these newly appropriated funds went to students who had no assistance from their families.
So it looks like, at least for right now, the Hope Scholarship is going to stay the same way it was last year. Is that the bottom line?
I think it is. We heard some pretty dire predictions this week about what will happen in a few years with Hope if the Georgia Lottery revenues aren't somehow able to be improved. But for right now, I think we're okay.
Are you hearing any talk at all at the Capitol, Tom, while we're on the lottery issue, of how to enhance revenues to the lottery? Or is the whole idea of video lottery terminals, going to come up at all in this session?
That came up at a hearing the other day, and I saw a lot of interest on the part of some legislators. They seem to be really interested in looking at it, or at least looking at the possibility of casinos with video lottery terminals. It's worked very well in places like Delaware, and they think it might be worth a try here. So I think there's definitely some interest there.
Could the lottery board, under the authority they already have, go ahead and put up some video terminals in enterprise zones already existing around the Georgia World Congress Center, for instance?
They legally have that authority. Jimmy Braswell, the lottery board chairman, acknowledged that, but he said that's a policy decision he would rather the General Assembly make before they move forward.
Let's move back to education in just a moment. Probably not so surprisingly, the governor announced over $8 million in supplemental grants to charter schools. That seemed to get a big reaction from the chamber last night.
That's right, and there's going to be a big push this session to try to pass a constitutional amendment to clear up that problem that the Georgia Supreme Court came up with last year. The $8 million can tide them over until a constitutional amendment could be approved, but that could eliminate a lot of the legal problems they have right now with funding some of these state charter schools.
Yeah, and again, the controversy has to deal with state control, local control, state standards. Let's take a look at what the governor had to say about all that last night.
I'm also recommending $8.7 million in supplemental grants in both the amended budget and next year's budget for state chartered special schools affected by the Georgia Supreme Court ruling on charter schools. These schools are key to Georgia's educational success, and without these additional dollars, they would be forced to operate on approximately half of the funds of other public schools. However, this is not the long-term solution, and I'm looking forward to working with you to ensure that charter schools can thrive in Georgia.
Have you heard anything at all about entire public school systems trying to go charter? There's even been some buzz in Fulton County about applying for something like that to happen.
Yeah, they have been able to do that for a couple of years now, and I think Decatur City is one of the early systems that became a chartered system. That's been an initiative of Lieutenant Governor Casey Cagle, so I think you'll see more moves in that direction as well.
Tom, of course, the budget is one of the big things, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on the scope of what the governor had to say, the numbers released today. Do we call this hopeful? Do we call this modest? Do we call this practical? What is it?
I think modest and hopeful are both good words to use. There is finally a little money to spend, and the governor's putting out small amounts here and there behind some initiatives he thinks can really help the state. So yeah, there's reason to feel optimistic, and they may be able to get some things done this year.
All right. Well, the budget hearings begin next week. The General Assembly will go into recess to do that. Tom Crawford of the Georgia Report, we appreciate your thoughts on this and many other things. Thanks for joining us tonight on Prime Time Lawmakers.
Thank you, Scott.
You can see Tom's blog online at gareport.com. In just a moment, we are going to move right on. We'll go right on to Jay Neal this evening. Where I'm glad you're here. My guest tonight represents the 1st District in Northwest Georgia. In the State of the State address, the governor addressed recidivism rates in the state. And Jay Neal is going to join us here to talk about that in just a moment. First of all, let me welcome you to Prime Time Lawmakers.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
Yeah, the whole idea, and the governor went to great lengths to say that don't mistake this for being soft on crime. Mm-hmm. This whole idea of judicial reform, finding different ways to deal with nonviolent offenders. Do you buy that?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that is very important for people to understand as we move forward here is that we're not being soft on crime, we're being smart on crime. We're looking for ways that we can most effectively deal with the offenders so that we create better public safety, we reduce recidivism, and we take these offenders who are tax burdens and we put them in a position where they become taxpayers and a productive part of our society.
Well, the criminal justice reform has been a theme in the legislature now. We're moving into the second year of this term, more or less. And the governor, of course, has been a big fan of that. So is the speaker. Let's get a look at some of what the governor had to say about justice reform as it moves forward in the General Assembly.
Unless we provide the appropriate tools of supervision that facilitate a successful reentry into society, history has shown us that offenders simply return to the prison population. Right now in Georgia, nearly 1 in 3 leaving our prisons are reconvicted within 3 years. We must shut that revolving door.
Would it be fair to say that an awful lot of that revolving door does revolve around drug crimes and alcohol and things like that?
It would be very fair to say that. And one of the reasons that's the case, Scott, is because we're taking an addiction, which is a disease, and rather than treating the disease, we've been punishing the behavior that's the result of the disease. By punishing that behavior, we've done nothing to correct the disease. We've done nothing to allow those individuals to be able to understand their disease and to be able to have the tools they need to overcome that disease. And many of those crimes are addiction-driven crimes. So if we begin to change the way we're handling these offenders and give them the opportunity to get the treatment they need for their addiction, when these individuals are living in recovery, they're like you and I. They want to live productive lives. They want to be there with their families. They want to be able to overcome that addiction, but they are trapped in the addiction, and we've got to be able to give them the help they need to be able to get out of it.
People shouldn't mistake what I know about this subject. You know a lot more than me. Drug courts is not a soft, easy, cushy way out, are they?
Absolutely not. There's a great deal of accountability. There's a great deal of times when those individuals are seeing counselors. They're working with probation. They're working with the judge. They're required to be working or seeking employment. And those individuals are given the tools that they need to be able to plug back into society. And there are consequences if they're not able to fulfill the expectations of the drug court. There are consequences for them. So it's a great way to give them an opportunity to learn how to be a productive member of society.
And in fact, Governor Neal had something to say about those alternative drug courts last night. Let's watch.
I'm also recommending $10 million in next year's budget for the creation of new accountability courts, drug, DUI, mental health, and veterans courts, all of which have proven to be both cheaper and more effective than traditional courts for those low-risk offenders falling under their jurisdiction. In fact, drug courts around the nation have proven to reduce recidivism by as much as 35%.
As much as 35%. So we have a success story to tell so far, and even in the small way we're moving forward on drug courts.
Absolutely. And it's not something that's happening in isolated cases. It's something that's happening in the drug courts and the accountability courts that we have in the state of Georgia, but it's also happening across the country as well.
Thank you so much. We'll have to leave you right there.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry for your service and your pushing ahead on this important issue.
Thank you, Scott.
We'll
Appreciate
be checking
it.
back with you on this.
Thank you so much.
My guest tonight has been Representative Jay Neal. He represents the 1st District in Northwest Georgia. Thanks for joining us tonight. Coming up tomorrow on Prime Time Lawmakers, I'll talk with Higher Education Committee Chairman Senator Buddy Carter and Representative Carl Rogers about Hope scholarships and campus consolidations. That conversation and more tomorrow on Lawmakers. If you missed any part of this broadcast, you can catch Primetime Lawmakers when it repeats at 5:30 tomorrow morning. Coming up next to GPB, Georgia Outdoors. Join host Sharon Collins for Loggerheads, the epic journey. That and much more on Georgia Outdoors next. That's our broadcast for this, the 3rd legislative day of the 2012 session. I'm Scott Slade. Join us at Primetime Lawmakers tomorrow night at 7. Have a great evening.
This is a GPB original production.